to come to our final session for the day. And we're going to go into the future and have a look at the millennial period and the time beyond the millennium as it's recorded for us in Revelation 20 and 21 and 22. I have to be very brief about 22. We are going to try and do some work on Revelation 20 and 21. But let's just start in the previous chapter, in Revelation chapter 19, because it's here that we read about Christ riding upon a white horse. In verse 11, I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness doth he judge and make war. Now, of course, white is the colour of righteousness. Horse is a symbol for war, and the horse here I'm going to show you in a moment is actually Israel, that Christ will use as his vehicle of judgment or warfare. Now, that's why you've got white, righteousness, horse, war in the same verse. See, so it's actually interpreting it itself for you. White horse is righteous war, and it will be fought by Christ, but he won't be alone, because you can see there are others on horses behind him, and those, of course, are the saints, and we'll have a quick look at that in a minute. But first of all, let's just demonstrate scripturally that the horse here is Israel. You know what the roots of Revelation 19 are? Isaiah 63. So come back to Isaiah 63. In Isaiah 63 we have a prophecy concerning the treading out of a wine press. And that's what's happening in Revelation 19. Isaiah 63. I'm just going to very quickly read a couple of verses at the front of the chapter to see the context that we're in. Verse 1, Who is this that cometh from Edom, with dyed garments from Bosra? This is glorious in his apparel, travelling in the greatness of his strength. I that speak in righteousness, mighty to save, that is to save Israel. Wherefore art thou red in thine apparel? Well, why did you get this? Well, it says at the end of verse 2, Him that treadeth in the wine vat. So this is the treading out of a wine press. Revelation 19 is based upon Isaiah 63. The Edom here is a reference to the Babylonian system that Christ and the saints will destroy. And if you want proof of that, you need to get those 18 videos and have a look at some of that. Proof beyond all dispute, brothers and sisters. I did a Bible school at Shippensburg in 2006 where that was the subject. So you can prove it, no doubt about that. The Edom here is latter-day Babylon. The anti-Semitic powers, well, who was Edom? Well, his name was Esau. He was the first Jew-hater. He wanted to kill Jacob. The first Jew-hater, an anti-Semite, so to speak. That's why Edom becomes the way that God describes the latter-day Jew-haters who want to exterminate the Jew. So that's your context, the treading out of a wine press. Have a look with me at verses 12 and 13 of Isaiah 63. That led them by his right hand, by the right hand of Moses with his glorious arm, dividing the water before them, to make himself an everlasting name. That led them through the deep, symbol for the nations, sea, as a horse in the wilderness. Yes, it's the wilderness of the peoples, the wilderness in which that woman sitting upon the scarlet-coloured beast in Revelation 17 verses 1 to 3 is seen. It's called a wilderness of the peoples. There's only one wilderness of the peoples in the Bible. It's Europe. And I can show you this from Isaiah 21, I can show you from Ezekiel 20, show you from Revelation chapter 17. There's one wilderness of the people. It's Europe, and it will be in rebellion against the rule of Christ. So how is Israel described in the first Exodus? Yeah, as a horse in the wilderness. Now, normally it's the ass, it's the symbol of Israel, isn't it? So why does God change it to a horse, do you think? Well, because this chapter happens to be the roots of Revelation 19, that's why. He's preparing the ground for it. So you've got the horse, the symbol for Israel, in the wilderness of the peoples. So here you've got Christ riding upon this horse of Israel. It's his vehicle of judgment. But he's not alone. If you notice in verse 14 it says, this is Revelation 19 in verse 14, the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, clothed in fine linen, white and clean. Who could that be? Well, verse 8 tells you who they are. Verse 8, Revelation 19, tells you who they are. And to her, the bride of Christ, was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white. For the fine linen is the righteousnesses of the saints, as it should read. It's the saints who are riding upon white horses. So Christ is presented as riding a horse. The saints are riding white horses. Not literal white horses. It'd be terrific, wouldn't it, if you like horses. But it's not about literal horses. The horse here is a symbol for Israel coming back under Elijah, being used as the vehicle of divine judgment. Brother Thomas says this in relation to Revelation 20, which of course now we sweep on to Revelation 20, verse 1. He says this, "And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand." He says this, "The blessed and only potentate upon the white horse," we've just been considering in chapter 19, "with the hosts of heaven, the saints riding as it were upon the symbolic white horses, marching at the head of his army from his capital," that is, the way against Babylon, we saw in an earlier study, "against the kings of the earth and their forces, is the apocalyptic angel descending with key and chain to arrest, imprison and destroy the powers of the world." That's what Revelation 19 is about, and it culminates in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 1 and onwards. So what happens? What happens here? Well, verse 2 of Revelation 20 says, "And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and he bound him for 1,000 years." Brother Thomas goes on to say this. The saints did, by the way. We've talked about that. We'll move on. He says, "When potentates leave their capitals on warlike expeditions, they are said to descend upon the countries they invade. So with this angel. He descends from the heaven of his habitation and government upon the territories of the devil and Satan." He has a key. It's the key of the abyss, we read in verse 1, and again in verse 3. "Cast him into the bottomless pit, or the abyss." That word there in the Greek that is rendered bottomless pit is abyssos. We get the word abyss from it. It means an immeasurable depth. It refers here obviously to the sea. The sea is a symbol of nations. In Isaiah 17:12-13. Brother Thomas again says in Eureka Volume 5, "To have the key of the abyss is to possess the power of developing political organisations or suppressing them." And we know, of course, this language comes from the Old Testament. And way back in Isaiah 44, verse 27, we read, "That said to the deep, be dry." This is the work of Cyrus, remember. "And I will dry up thy rivers." Just so happens that the Greek translation of the Hebrew, the Septuagint version, that was written, of course, even before the prophecies of Daniel came to pass, as I mentioned, happens to use the Greek word abyssos for the Hebrew word deep. So there you've got another little proof. And this is talking about the sea. So here we've got a power that's destroyed by Christ and the saints. It's called the dragon, the devil, and the Satan. It's called, more importantly, something else. The dragon, of course, we've understood from reading the Apocalypse. This is a reference. It's a reference to the political powers of men, especially the Roman power, the pagan Roman power. The devil, or diabolos, is a false accuser or a slanderer. That's what the Roman system did to our brethren. And Satan, of course, is an adversary, one who opposes another in purpose or act. It's very important to recognise in verse 2 of Revelation 20 who this actually is. Because it says, "That old serpent," the devil and Satan. Now why is the old serpent? Well, because it's the one back in Genesis chapter 3. That's the oldest serpent of the Bible, isn't it? The one in Genesis chapter 3. So it's talking about human nature, brothers and sisters, in political manifestation. That's what this old serpent is here. That's what the dragon, the devil and Satan are. It's human political opposition to the rule of Christ. It's going to be destroyed. And that old serpent, human nature, is going to be bound for 1,000 years under the rigid rule of Christ and his saints. And we know, of course, this is the subject of Revelation chapter 20. Brother Robert says in the 13 lectures on the Apocalypse, page 174, the dragon is the heraldic symbol of human hostility to God, officially incorporate in the kings and governments in which it is headed up. That's perfectly true. So you've got human hostility to God. Just like the serpent, of course, told the lie in the garden that brought us undone. That old serpent of verse 2 traces the origin of this power right back to the Garden of Eden. Well, here's what's going to happen in this millennial period. The serpent is going to be bound. So here we've got the Jubilee period we spoke about, the 50-year period up front, leading to the establishment of the kingdom. Here we've got another little season. Revelation 20 verse 3 talks about a little season in which this serpent is released. He's bound for 1,000 years, then he's released. Now, I think that period will be approximately the same, if not exactly the same, 50 years at the end of the millennium. So in this period of judgment, flesh is subdued. They're chained up, so to speak. They're bound for 1,000 years. But then they're released. Flesh is unleashed. And political opposition will arise to the rule of Christ and the saints at the end of the millennium. And then, of course, there's a second resurrection and judgment after those people who have rebelled have been destroyed. That's the story of Revelation chapter 20. You know, I've known some people who say, oh, how can that be? You've got a perfect rule, you've got a perfect government, you've got Christ and the saints ruling perfectly. I don't know what mirror they're looking into. But when I look into the mirror and I look at my human nature, it's not a pretty sight. You can put this nature, brothers and sisters and friends, in the most perfect environment and it still behaves the same. It's biased towards evil, isn't it? You can lock it up for 1,000 years and let it out for a while. Guess what it does? Guess what some of us will do when we let out of this hall? You only got to just look in the mirror for a while. Look at human nature. There's nothing magical about that. It's the way it operates. It will rebel against Christ. And in fact, the majority of mankind will rebel. You know that? In Revelation 20 verse 8 it says their number was like the sand upon the seashore in multitude. Come on! That's the majority of mankind. Sad, isn't it? Sad. I can't wait. You can't wait to be rid of this nature. True. I want to get rid of it. Because while you've got it, it's going to cause you trouble. David prayed. He prayed for the day of his change. He couldn't wait for the day of his change. It's coming. This old serpent is finally going to be destroyed. And that's the subject matter of Revelation chapter 20. And the earth will rest from war, from that hostility that God introduced in Genesis chapter 3 verse 15 when he said, I will put enmity between the serpent and the woman. By the woman, of course, he meant his way of thinking. Eve initially upheld God's law. Enmity between the serpent, a moral, carnal thinking, which we now have, unfortunately, and the divine mind. That will come to an end, that hostility. Brother Thomas does say in Eureka Volume 5, page 321, sin's flesh is to be turned out of office and to exist only in absolute subjection to spirit, as manifested in Jesus and his brethren. So, there we've got the end of the serpent. And what, of course, will be our role in the kingdom is kings and priests. We shall be kings and priests to rule over the nations of the earth for 1,000 years. And that's the subject matter of Revelation chapter 20, verses 4 to 6. All I want to do is read the end of verse 4 and verse 6 for the sake of time. The end of verse 4 says, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead, verse 5, got to wait another 1,000 years. So those who died during the millennium, the mortals, they've got to wait 1,000 years to be resurrected and judged. But you and I, brothers and sisters, made immortal at the judgment seat of Christ, will be there with him as kings and priests. Look at verse 6. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. What a wonderful blessing that will be. And we will serve in this house as priests and serve outside of this land as kings. In other words, given administration of an area of the world. But just imagine coming back to a place, it might not be called Michigan, but just imagine coming back to Michigan, as it will be in the kingdom age, and having every single person you meet saying to you, please, can you sit down with me and talk about the Bible? You imagine that? Doesn't happen today. It's just going to happen tomorrow. Right? Won't that be fabulous? Inviting you to their home saying, please come and talk about the Bible. That's what it's going to be like in that day. Kings, administrators of an area, priests in the house of God. What a fabulous future we've got, brothers and sisters. But you know, human nature being what it is, at the end of 1,000 years it will revolt. The spirits of liberty, equality and fraternity that will bring the nations of this world to Armageddon will be revived again. It says in verse 7 of Revelation 20, and when the 1,000 years are expired, when they're completed, Satan, the adversary, the one back in verse 2, the old serpent, political manifestation of flesh, he will go out to deceive the nation. So a group of men will collect together. Someone gets a bright idea, the saints have been withdrawn, Christ will take the saints back to Jerusalem. He'll probably stop people having babies, because you can't have babies at the second resurrection and judgment, can you? Alright, everybody's going to be immortal beyond that. So you can stop births. Someone's going to get the bright idea and say, why don't we throw off this mob? Why don't we get rid of them? Alright? It'll take them a while to get going. But you know, even in this chapter I can tell you about what method they're going to use. You know why I can tell you that? Because there's a hint dropped. And the hint is dropped in verse 4. It says that at the first resurrection and judgment, when the saints are immortalised, these are the ones who were beheaded for the witness of Jesus. I don't think I'm going to be beheaded. John was. Paul was. So they say. There probably were a few in history who were beheaded. It says that these are the people who were beheaded for the witness of Jesus. It's a hint. It's dropping a hint. Because you see, in the kingdom age, they won't have M16 machine guns, will they? The only things that they'll have to use as weapons are machetes and axes and scythes. What are you going to do with them? When you go knocking on people's doors and saying, we're going to revolt against Christ and his saints, they're gone in. Look, they're not here anymore. You're going to join us, aren't you? If you're not, I'm going to cut your head off. Nobody gets immortal life, brothers and sisters, without being tested. People born through the millennium, during the millennium, will live for hundreds of years. You don't get immortality in an armchair. No one does. So how are they going to be tested? Well, when the saints are withdrawn. And when the rebellion starts, and people come knocking on doors and saying, you'll join us, or we'll do what ISIS does. We need to rise in a town. Cut your head off. Got a picture? And there will be a big rebellion. Go to deceive the nations. Who are they? Gog and Magog. Now these are not the Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38. They're long since gone. So why do you think we've got these two names back? Well, because you see they relate to Amalek. Gog is rendered in Numbers 24 verse 7. In another translation, Agag is rendered Gog. Alright? Agag and Gog are equivalent terms. Gog, Magog. It's talking about the Amalekites. Now you go and make a study of Exodus 17, you'll get your answer. The answer is that when God chooses a symbol for the Amalekites, he chooses what? The serpent. I will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Yeah. He uses the serpent. Now, I'll spend some time on that, I'm not going to do it. That's why these two names are here. This is the serpent in political manifestation at the end of 1,000 years. To gather them, to the battle, to the warfare. The word that is actually used in Exodus 17 verse 16 in the Septuagint. Amalek. Amalek is the symbol being used here. That's why you've got Gog or Agag, the king of the Amalekites, referred to in those names. So what happens to them? Well, they're cast into a lake of fire. That's what happens to them. And you read that in verse 10 of Revelation 20. And the devil that deceived them that was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet were cast, as it should read. That is 1,000 years before. And shall be tormented day and night, forever and ever. So a lake of fire, of course, is a symbol for utter, total, permanent, everlasting destruction. Alright? That's where they're going. Everlasting destruction. Now I want to show you something that's fascinating. And this is where it gets a little deeper, but it's not impossible. I want you to have your hand in two places in the Bible. I want you to have a hand in Revelation 20, which is where we are now, and a hand in Joshua chapter 11. Now I'm going to give you the trimmings of this. I'm not going to give it all. You get those studies that we did at the School of Prophets, you'll get it all. In fact, last weekend I was in Joplin, Missouri, and our study was the Apocalypse in Joshua, and we did this in great detail. So let's just do it briefly. But you'll see that the language of Revelation 20 is actually drawn from Joshua chapter 11. Now Joshua 11 deals with the final conflict in the conquest of the land of Canaan under Joshua. The final conflict. Well, what will be the final conflict that Christ is going to fight? Well, the rebellion at the end of the 1,000 years. Alright? Now, just so happens that Joshua chapter 11 ends with this sentence in verse 23. This is the final sentence of the chapter. And the land rested from war. Guess what the word land is in the Hebrew? Eretz. It's mostly translated earth. Now, of course, it refers to the land of Canaan here. That's why it's translated land. But that word is often rendered earth. So let's render it that way. Let's lift it to the higher level. And the earth rested from war. When? When Genesis 3:15 is finally fulfilled and the serpent's destroyed and the hostility that God created is gone. That's when it will rest from war. This chapter is the roots of Revelation chapter 20. I'm not going to go into great explanations about Jabin. His name means intelligent, which just happens to be, of course, the characteristic of the old serpent. In Genesis 3 verse 1, he was more subtle than any beast of the field that the Lord God had made. I'm not going to go into that, but there are two Jabins in the Bible, one in Joshua 11 and one in Judges 4. In both places, they are a type of the serpent in political manifestation. So let's have our comparison. So Jabin appears in Joshua 11 verse 1. It came to pass when Jabin, king of Hatzor, heard those things that he sent. And he gathers together, you know how many peoples there are here? Kings and peoples? Count them up. 13. 13 is the biblical number for rebellion. Yeah, because this is all about the rebellion at the end of the 1,000 years. How do we know that that's the case? Well, let's read on. They come from the north. Joshua 11, verses 2 and 3, you can look at the words for yourself. I'm going to read them all. From the north, the south, the east and the west. What does Revelation 20 in verse 8 say? And it says this, Revelation 20 in verse 8. And they shall go out, the old serpent shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth. Well, what are the four quarters of the earth? The north, the south, the east and the west. In Joshua chapter 11 and verse 4 you read that their number is the sand on the seashore. What does Revelation 20 say in verse 8? It says at the end of verse 8, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. In Joshua chapter 11 verse 5 it says that this great multitude, when all these kings were met together, they came and pitched together at the waters of Meron to fight against Israel. Now the word Meron, by the way, means height or elevation. And they come and they pitch against this place at Meron. Well, what is this multitude going to do? In Revelation chapter 20 and verse 9 it says this. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and they compassed the camp of the saints about and the beloved city. Well, what's the beloved city? Well, Zion, isn't it? Jerusalem. And in Psalm 48 verse 2 you read the words, beautiful for situation is Mount Zion. Not a good translation. Look up the Hebrew word. It should be rendered. Beautiful for elevation is Mount Zion. That's the meaning of Meron. Elevation. What happens then in Joshua 11 verse 6? Well, Joshua burns their chariots with fire. And in Revelation 20 verse 9 we read this at the end of the verse. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. Now some of you are probably sitting there saying, well that sounds pretty interesting, but that's not final proof. You're about to get it. Alright? Because when you come to verse 8 of Joshua chapter 11, you read this. And Yahweh delivered them into the hand of Israel and smote them and chased them unto Great Sidon and unto Mishrephoth Maim. As far as I'm going to go. You might have the same margin in your Bible that I have in mine. In the margin of my Bible it says that Mishrephoth Maim means burnings of waters. Now I thought you put fire out with water. Didn't you? That's what the fighters do. They put fire out with water. So how can you have burnings of waters? Only if you have a lake of fire. If you have a lake of fire, you have burnings of waters. And in Revelation chapter 20 and at verse 10 you read that the diabolos that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. Mish, Rephoth, Main. Got it? Now what does it then say at the end of verse 8? Well, it says he left them none remaining. You can add to that what it says in verse 11, and it's repeated again in verse 14. He left none to breathe. I wonder why it uses that language, that he left none to breathe. If you kill someone, they're not breathing. Come on, you don't need to say it. He left none to breathe. Why does it say that? Well, because you see, the subject matter of Revelation 20 is the abolition of mortality at the end of the millennium. And you don't have mortals, no one is breathing oxygen anymore. Oxygen is not required. There's none to breathe oxygen anymore beyond the millennium. That's why it says it twice in Joshua 11. There's none to breathe. And of course I mentioned verse 23, the land rested from war. And when the serpent is finally destroyed in all its forms, and human nature as we know it is gone, there will be a rest from hostility in the world. Now, I've just given you, whatever that was, 5 or 10 minutes. You can do a whole session on that. You would be astonished at what I haven't told you out of Joshua chapter 11. It is unbelievable what's there in Joshua 11. But it's the roots of Revelation 20. No question about that. The language is borrowed from Joshua chapter 11. Well, where do we go then? To the end of chapter 20 of the Apocalypse, where we read in verse 12 about the second resurrection and judgment. It says, I saw the dead, small and great, these are the ones who died during the millennium, stand before God, and the books were open. Another book was open, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. We have reference. I'd love to be able to talk about that. I haven't got time to do so today. This is about the second resurrection and judgment. And the keepers of those books, brothers and sisters, during the millennial age are you and me. We will be the angels of the future age, and the angels of this age are keeping records about you and me right now. And we're about to meet one of them. He's going to take out a scroll, a book, and work through it with us. Right, before we appear before our Lord Jesus Christ. And when we become the angels of the future age, we will do exactly the same for the mortals who live out their probation in the kingdom. We will keep the records. The books, plural, just one for each person. Plural books. They will be brought out. And if your name is not found in the singular book, the book of life, you don't go into immortality. Simple as that. So we've got two books to deal with in our life. The one that the angel keeps every day, and the one that Christ, as it were, wrote our names in when we were baptised. Serpent nature will finally be eradicated. For whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire, the symbol of everlasting destruction. Mortality will be gone. The serpent will be dead forevermore. That is where Revelation 20 leads us. Now, the fascinating thing about the last three chapters of our Bible is that they actually present the culmination of the three great covenants of the Bible in the order in which God delivered them. Revelation 20 is about the destruction of that old serpent. It's clearly about the fulfillment of Genesis 3:15. That's the first great covenant of the Bible, isn't it? What's the second? Well, the Abrahamic covenant. Yes. And that's the subject matter of Revelation 21. The Abrahamic covenant is seen to be fulfilled in Revelation 21. What have we got? Well, we've got a holy city. I'll show this to you in a minute. We've got a holy city, which is an Abrahamic city, finally completed. We have one nation left on earth, the nation of Israel, that embraces all other people. And we have eternal inheritance experienced by all in the earth. And Revelation 22 is about the promises made to David being fulfilled. There will be divine authority over all the earth, David's throne established forever, in his presence, and the spiritual house of David complete. Which to him, by the way, was the most important thing that God promised him. You know, when God gave him the promise of 2 Samuel 7, David went and sat in the tent with the ark, or near the ark, you know what he did? He couldn't think of anything else but the house that God promised him. Yeah, the house was the spiritual house. They wanted to build a literal house. God said, no, I'm going to build you a house. Yes, he meant the ecclesia. He meant the bride of Christ. That's what occupied the mind of David. That was the most important thing to him. Seemed to be fulfilled in Revelation 22. And Revelation 22 just happens to start with a throne. And you know what throne that is because it's the same one that you meet in chapter 4. And it tells you in chapter 5 it's the throne of David. Alright? No question about that. And if that wasn't enough proof, Revelation 22 verse 16 says, Christ in his final word says, I am the root and the offspring of David. Yeah, he's telling us. Revelation 22, fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. Now, if we were to, I'm not going to take you back to Joshua 12, we've just been there, but if you go back to Joshua 12, the very next chapter, because chapter 20 is the basis of Revelation 20, the very next chapter is Joshua 12, where we read of 31 kings who are subdued, and their land is given to Israel. So there's no opposition to Israel. No kings left in that land. There's only one nation in the land of Canaan now. One nation. That's what's going to happen in the millennium. There will only be one nation left on earth. And it will be the nation of Israel perfected. And you and I hope to be part of it. It's actually the subject matter of the very first promise that God made to Abraham. So what was that promise? Well, we're going to see in a minute. Jeremiah 30 verse 11, repeated again in Jeremiah 46 verse 28, says this: Though I make a full end of all nations, whither I have scattered thee, meaning Israel, yet will I not make a full end of thee. So God repeats that promise. All other nations are going to be abolished. One nation will survive and will never have an end. It's the nation of Israel. Now all of that was prefigured in the Feast of Tabernacles, the third major feast of Israel's religious year. They kept it over 7 days. And during that 7 days they offered 70 bullocks. However, there were also lambs and goats offered, but exactly the same number of lambs and goats every day for the 7 days. Not so with the bullocks. On day 1 they offered 13 bullocks. God starts with the number of rebellion which we go to unwind. Human rebellion that began with Nimrod. On day 2 it was 12 bullocks. On day 10 it was 11. Right down to day 7. So reducing by 1 each day. Starting with 13. And on day 7 there was 7. And if you add 13 plus 12 plus 11 plus 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7, guess what you get? 70. Yeah. There were 70 bullocks. Why is that important? Well, 70 just happens to be the number of the nations. And if you do your count in Genesis chapter 10, when Nimrod brought about the dispersion of peoples through the changing of their languages, guess how many there are? 70. 70 is the biblical number for the nations. And I could heap some proofs on you in that regard, no time right now. So what feast will the nations keep during the millennium? Well, we're told that in Zechariah 14 verse 16. They will keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Why will they keep the Feast of Tabernacles? Well, because God will be impressing upon them that during that millennium they're all going to be drawn into one nation, the nation of Israel. There's not going to be 70 anymore. That's why, brothers and sisters, that's why on the very last holy convocation in Israel's religious year, which happened to be the 8th day, the next day after the Feast of Tabernacles, they only offered one book. They offered one book. Why would they do that, do you think? On the 8th day, well, the 8th millennium There's going to be a time when God is all and in all, and there will only be one nation left on earth. It's the nation of Israel. The nations of the earth will have been embraced into one nation. That's what God is doing. And that's the story of Revelation 21. That's what God meant when he called Abram out of Ur the Chaldees. What was the very first thing that God promised Abram? And I will make of thee a great nation. Right up front. He did not mean the nation of Israel in the days of David or Solomon. He meant Israel at the end of the millennium. When all on earth will be immortal and part of one nation. I will make of thee a great nation. That's where God's headed. So I want you to come to Revelation 21. When it starts this way, you know this is the subject. Revelation 21 verse 1. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth. This is actually the third heavens and earth. The one that Paul was taken into. Remember in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he went into paradise for the third heaven. That's what's being referred to here. But the next words are this. For the first heaven and the first earth. Now that word first there would be better rendered in the Greek, if you're going to be literal, former. The former heaven and the former earth were passed away. Well, what's the former? Well, the subject matter of Revelation 20, isn't it? What's that? The 1,000-year reign of Christ. So that was the second heavens and earth. Now we're living in the first heavens and earth, aren't we? The millennium is about to come. That's going to be the second heavens and earth. But then there's going to be a third. And 7,000 years have expired, and God is all in all. We'll have our third heavens. So what's the nature of this third heavens? We'll look at the end of verse 1. And there was no more sea. So what's the sea a symbol of? Nations. No more sea. But what is there? Well, there's the holy city. It comes down in verse 2. From God out of heaven. There is an organisation left, isn't there? I want to show you what that organisation is. So the heavens and the earth, the millennial, are past. There's no sea, no more nations, only one. Then a city appears, adorned as a bride. It's the final phase of the ecclesia. Adorned as a bride for a husband. Not a literal city. It's a corporation of people. A community of people, as you're going to see. Now, who's identified? Well, it's identified with Israel. It's got Israel stamped all over it. The city is dominated by 12. There are 12 gates, there are 12 foundations, there are 12 apostles, there are 12 stones. The wall is 144 cubits high. That's 12 times 12. In fact, if you take the 144 as 2 12s, even the number 12 occurs 12 times in Revelation 21 and 22. Alright, you can't be clearer than that, can you? What's 12 the number of? Israel. It is the only surviving nation on earth at the end of the millennium. Though I make a full end of all nations, will I scatter you, Israel? I will not make a full end of you. They're going to go on forever. But its constituents will be immortals, and we hope to be among them. The city is a corporation of immortal people, the Israel of God in its final manifestation. And this is what it looks like. Now, it's not literal. I mean, it couldn't be literal. It's 12,000 furlongs. That's 2,400 kilometres. People who use the silly European system. What would that be? 1,800 miles or something? I don't know, something like that. 1,800 miles. Square. It's a cube. So it can't be literal. That's ridiculous. No, it's not literal. It's a symbol. It's a symbol for a community of people. It's got 12 stamped all over. It's even 12,000 furlongs. 12 is the number of Israel. 1,000, as we saw earlier, is the word for a family to a Hebrew. Alright? This is the whole family of Israel in its perfected form. Perfect hue. The most holy, because you see, only immortals, and the high priest was a typical immortal man, could go into the most holy. So this is all about everyone being immortal. Perfect cue. City occurs 12 times in Revelation 21:22. Highlight them. The word city is there 12 times. This is the Abrahamic city of Hebrews chapter 11. Now I need to show you this one. I need you to come to Hebrews 11 and 12 with me. In Hebrews 11 we have the record of Abraham leaving Ur of the Chaldees in verse 8. In verse 9 it tells us, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise. And in verse 10 it tells us this, for he looked for a city which hath foundations. Do you think that Abraham was looking for a city like Ur? No. Have a look at verse 16 of Hebrews 11. But now they, meaning the patriarchs, desire a better country that is in heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be surnamed their God, because he named himself after Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, for he hath prepared for them a city. So what city is this? Well, it's not a city of brick and stone. Turn to chapter 12 of Hebrews. Chapter 12 and verses 22 and 23. Where Paul writes, in verse 22, but ye are come unto Mount Zion, and unto the city, so there it is, unto the city of the living God. So what is it, Paul? The heavenly Jerusalem. Revelation 21 talks about the city coming down from heaven, from God. It's holy city Jerusalem. Yes, it's not a literal city. It's a bunch of people. It's a corporation of people. In Australia, if you want to be called a city, you have to have 100,000 people. You're called a town or a village until you get 100,000 people. Then they can call you a city. All right. A city is not a bunch of buildings. It's a group of people who live in the same place. Okay? So what we have come to, brothers and sisters, is the ecclesia. The ecclesia of our Lord Jesus Christ. We are potentially members of his bride. If we're glorified, we will rule with him for 1,000 years. At the end, we will be there for the second resurrection and judgment. And beyond that, every single one who's accepted as an immortal being will be part of this city. It's not only a city, it's a great nation. I will make of thee a great nation. And the nation is called Israel. The Israel of God. Right? Paul tells us. I could have read the rest of it. Maybe I should read it. Verses 22, 23. I've got there under the word city of the living God. The heavenly Jerusalem, and an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and ecclesia of firstborn. You can cross out the article, not in the Greek. You can add an S onto the word firstborn. It's in the plural of the Greek. We've come, he says, to the ecclesia of firstborns. And to God, the judge of all, and to the spirits, by which, of course, he means the characters. Because they're described in chapter 11. The characters of just men made perfect. So we've come to a city too, and we hope to be constituent members of this one. Brother Thomas says in Eureka, the holy city is styled by him the New Jerusalem body politic and the Holy Jerusalem Association of Saints. It is the Yahweh Hellenistic municipality. Now a municipality is a city, isn't it? Symbolised by 144 cubits, that's the height of the wall, each cubit representing 1,000 of the numerical symbol of this holy nation, the Israel of the deity. See, city is a corporation of people, a nation is a group of people, isn't it? Same thing, essentially. They're equivalent ideas. Well, I want to conclude with just a brief mention of the Davidic covenant being fulfilled in Revelation 22. I think you can see from what we've said that Revelation 21 is about the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promise, the city to which he looked. If you want to really nail down Revelation 21, make a note of this fact, that the first 8 verses of Revelation 21 take you beyond the millennium, to the time when God is all in all. From verse 9 onwards to the end of the vision in chapter 22 tells you how we get there. It's typical of the apocalypse. So the first 8 verses of Revelation 21 take you beyond the millennium. How do I know that? Well, read verse 4. God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. No more death means no more mortality. Alright? We're beyond the millennium. The first 8 verses of Revelation 21. That's when your holy nation, the great nation, the holy city, Jerusalem, will be in its final form, in a company of people, all made like their God. And that's why it says in Revelation 21 verse 3, that God will have no diffidence to dwell among men. Can't do that today. He won't be able to do that in the millennium, because there'll still be mortals and sin and rebellion. In verse 3 of chapter 21 it says, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be their God. Guess where that language comes from, brothers and sisters? That God will be with them, they will be his people, right, and he will be their God. That comes from Genesis chapter 17, verses 7 and 8. Jot it down and have a look at it. That is the language of the Abrahamic covenant. In the chapter where God changes Abram's name and makes it into Abraham, the father of a multitude of nations. We're going to see God. That's the promise of Matthew 5, isn't it? Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. We're about to see Christ, but 1,000 years later, we're going to see God, because there will be no problem for him to come to the earth. What a fantastic thing that is, eh? It's about to become a reality. Just a brief word on the promises today. Revelation 22 verses 1 and 3, you've got a throne. We know what throne that is from Revelation chapter 5 verses 5 and 7. It's the throne of David. In the vision of Revelation 4, the Greek for throne occurs 14 times. 14 just happens to be the biblical number for the certainty of covenant. And in the last 3 chapters of the Bible, we've seen the 3 covenants fulfilled. Right. That's how the Bible ends. And this is what David looked for. Thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. That's why Christ says in Revelation 22 verse 16, I am the root and the offspring of David. I want to show you something in Revelation 22. Let the Bible interpret itself. Have a look at me at Revelation 22 verses 16 and then the early words of verse 17. Verse 16. I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the ecclesias. I am the root and the offspring of David and the bright and morning star. And the Spirit and the bride say, come. So what is the root of David? Well, Isaiah 11 tells you. It's the Spirit. Yeah. The Spirit is the root of David. Isaiah 11 verses 1 to 3 tells you that. And who's the offspring of verse 16, do you think? Well, the bride. See? I am the root. Spirit. And the offspring, because through him, brothers and sisters, we will become part of his bride. That's how the apocalypse ends. What a wonderful, wonderful promise that is. Little wonder in Revelation 21 verse 6, when these things become a reality and God is all and in all, there's a great shout that goes up in the earth for the 3rd time in history. He was heard on the cross. It's finished. It was for him. It's finished. It's done. In Revelation 16 and in verse 17, which you can match with Ezekiel 39 verse 8, it comes from the mouth of the saints. It is done! It's about to be said by you and me. At the end of 1,000 years, when God's all in all will be said for the last time, it's done! We are a very privileged people. Let us, brothers and sisters and friends, make sure we understand the message. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit said to the ecclesias. All the writings we need are there to help us understand the Scriptures. The Scripture itself is its own expositor. So I would ask you, if you want to take another step down the track, you can get hold of those videos we mentioned at the beginning. Because if you thought this was lofty, and some might have, I can tell you, it's going to take you a few more pegs up the ladder. But you'll get the whole Bible. And you know what you're going to find? It's the exact same message from Genesis to Revelation. It's not just Revelation. These exact same things are through the whole Bible. That's why we know that our faithful pioneer brethren got this right.